I think we're live on Facebook. Welcome, everyone. I'm Ricky Quintana, the founder and CEO of HoonArts Fair Trade. And with me, I have our chief collaborator, Denise Bucci. She's based in Asheville, North Carolina. And our wonderful guest today, Sarah Wilkinson. But I'm going to let Denise introduce Sarah today.
All right, yeah. So we're excited to welcome Sarah Wilkinson to our Conscious Collaboration Circle, or CCC, today. She is the founding director of Global One-to-One, formerly known as Project Peace Pal, which is a wonderful cultural exchange program working with young people in over 29 countries. She founded the organization in 2007, and today the main focus is on building intercultural understanding, empathy, critical thinking, and communication skills among young leaders around the world. And in 2020, Sarah received her master's in public administration, focusing her research on developing intercultural understanding and communication with adolescents through virtual exchange. Her work is dedicated to the belief that collaboration and partnerships highlight our shared humanity and become an unstoppable force for positive change. So we're excited to welcome Sarah, and I'll let Ricky and Sarah take it from here.
Thank you, Denise. The reason I had Denise introduce Sarah is because I actually met Denise through Sarah before we went live. We were trying to figure out when we first connected. We think it was either 2013 or 2014. We think it was probably 2013 when I was a volunteer with a local organization that hosts short-term professional exchange delegations. And we had our first delegation from Tajikistan, and the theme of their visit was youth and civic engagement. So we're pretty sure that we took that delegation to visit Sarah and learn about Global One-to-One, but we're not positive. But so the three of us have a long history together. So it's really a pleasure now for me to welcome Sarah to our CCC Conscious Collaboration Circle today and share with the HoonArts audience some of the amazing work she's doing. So,
and I meant to say real quick that I also worked with Global One-to-One for 2.5 years. I was the program coordinator and then program director. So I worked closely with Sarah throughout all that time, and that's how I met Ricky. So it really is a nice little mini reunion.
Yeah. So Denise, if you could spotlight Sarah.
Yes, of course.
Our audience sees way too much of me. So Sarah, first, why don't you tell us a little bit about your story? How is it that you came to devote so much of your life to this Global One-to-One organization?
Well, when I was in undergraduate in university, my major was cultural anthropology. So I've always been really interested in other cultures. I've always been really interested in alternative perspectives. And then after college, I was fortunate enough to do a fair amount of traveling around the world. And that just had a huge and enduring impact on me, on my priorities, the way I see the world. The way I traveled was kind of backpacking through a number of places, including India and Nepal. And it really was kind of an on-the-ground experience, no pun intended, because I think I also did camp in some places. But it just permanently changed my perspective. And so when years later, when I became a mother and my son was in elementary school, I was really concerned by how little I saw American kids learning about other parts of the world in a three-dimensional way, not just like a fact sheet kind of learning. And I think, at the time there were, I think for a lot of people, it's a confluence of a number of things that kind of created critical mass. So there was this concern. There was also my concern as a mother about creating positive, peaceful communication in the home, and realizing how hard that is, how quickly our minds turn to negative interpretations of things, which can lead to anger and resentment. And then the real catalyst was one day when my son and I were driving somewhere in the car, and he was in the back seat, and he announced to me that he needed a new PlayStation game. And he was very earnest. I need a new PlayStation game. And I think he probably knew which one he needed. But I said, well, you don't need it. You want it. And so there was a bit of silence from the back seat for a little while. And then he announced, well, they're the same thing. And I literally had to pull over to the side of the road because I was so shook by that. And it wasn't like, it just was, to me, it was, there's such a confusion in the world today about need and want for those of us that are living in privileged situations where we have our basic needs met. And so then things that we want can then become, we perceive them as a need. And so when I tried to talk with my son about that, he, his eyes glazed over. And so I kind of started thinking about it, and I realized what I wanted to do was to connect him with somebody in a very different country so that he could hear from them about their life. Because kids seem to really take in more from their peers than often from other adults. And so that started as a pen pal program in 2006, actually. And then in 2007 is when I got the 501c3 and incorporated. So initially we were writing handwritten pen pal letters to students in Togo, West Africa, and also in Ocotal, Nicaragua. And, it started out as a volunteer project, Ricky. I really just thought of it as kind of a short-term thing. And then it just grew and grew and grew. And here I am, almost 15 years later.
So what are you doing now, and who does your organization serve in 2021?
Oh, yeah, 2021. So much has changed, right? Not only in 15 years, but over just even the last year and a half. Well, we have been shifting away from more of the hard copy, handwritten letters, although I'm certainly reevaluating whether or not we want to make that a permanent change. So, of course, especially with the pandemic, when schools closed, students were at home, because typically our program is implemented in school classrooms with a teacher. So obviously that wasn't going to work last year. So we moved everything online into a virtual online platform. And this most recent year, in fact, just this last couple of weeks, we've kind of wrapped up for the school year. We had several hundred students in Boston, Massachusetts, and in Agadir, Morocco, participating in an online exchange. The majority of it was asynchronous, so it was activities that they shared online. And then that included short videos, which were really sweet. So students got to introduce themselves to each other with videos, especially with the time zone difference. That was important. And then my favorite part were the synchronous sessions, where we would meet on Saturday afternoons and get to know each other.
So what's different about your program from the traditional kind of pen pal program that I grew up with?
Well, that's a great question, because I I think that many people over the years have kind of confused what we do. And so that's one of the reasons that we continuously are working on how to communicate effectively what we do. So we take some of the best parts of that intimate pen-pal relationship, that one-to-one, and then we embed it in a group setting, the classroom or a school club. And within that setting, students learn about the country and the culture. They get a chance to hear from each other what their experiences are like with their pen pal. And so this ends up having like a exponential impact where you have that wonderful one-to-one experience that you had with a pen pal, and then it's kind of magnified in this group context. And it also sets more of a cultural, historical setting.
And don't you include as part of the program specific question prompts or writing prompts, so it's guided a little bit with an intention of students communicating their cultural context?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So we start with the premise that, everybody's a little shy to get to know each other. So we start off with introductions. So students, whether it's the pen pal letter or our online virtual exchange, they begin with just introductions. Who are you? Tell us a little bit about your family, your friends, your hobbies. And so then we begin to kind of build trust and familiarity with each other. And then we begin to talk, the prompts then proceed to, well, let's talk about some cultural traditions and holidays that you celebrate so that we can learn from each other. And then so typically the school year starts in about October and then runs through about March or April. And so gradually over the course of the year, then we begin to go into a more global perspective. So while we've started with, personal introductions, discussions of culture and holidays, then we begin to talk about global issues. What are some of the global issues that you're concerned about? What do you think you might be able to do as an individual? This last year on the virtual exchange, we were able to add in a component of social justice, learning about stereotyping and bias, and how to become more self-aware when we're in the middle of that. And then from there, move to this conversation about global issues so that, cultural barriers or bias and prejudice that can sometimes build roadblocks between our collaboration to address important issues. So I think by the end of the year, the students actually said that unit was the one that they feel like they actually are going to use throughout their lives, really becoming more self-aware about stereotypes.
And that leads into the next question, which is really about what kind of impact do you see your programs having both for individual students in the U.S. as well as in other countries, and what are the ripple effects beyond just the individual students in the individual classroom?
Boy, Denise could speak to this a little bit too. I mean, when we have had the pen pal letters as our main focus, by the way, every letter in the world came through our office so that we could organize them and make sure that they were ready for the teachers to make the teacher's life more easy. But that meant we got a chance to read the letters. And there were so many examples, especially towards the end of the year, where students voiced the incredible impact that this experience had on them, realizing that the world is smaller as a result of this kind of connection, realizing that they had more in common with people who they would have thought were really different from themselves. And it also incited and excited some curiosity about traveling, getting to know other people. So, I think at a collective level, there is definitely some seeds planted with young people who I hope that when they become leaders in their own life, whether that's in their community, their family, in the government, in their job, that they have this kind of sensitivity, this cultural sensitivity, this empathy for people who are different, that can then inform the decisions that they make as leaders in their lives.
And have you heard back from teachers about how the program may have impacted them?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, we've had some teachers work with us for many, many years, that they just keep coming back every year because they want their students to be involved. And typically the teachers that are really drawn to our program are ones that have traveled themselves, lived abroad, served in the Peace Corps. And so they have already had this really profound personal experience of how transformative it can be to get to know someone from another culture. And so they want their students, especially, we sometimes start as young as middle school and then into high school. And so either, number one, the population that participate in our program may be too young to travel on exchange trips. And a number of the populations that we work with are just students that wouldn't, be able to afford to travel. So these teachers will talk about that the reason that they went into teaching, to open the minds of students to the world and be curious. They have commented on how they have seen their students moved by and changed by participating in the program. And so that's been really, really rewarding to hear.
I get a little choked up myself.
Well, I do too. Yeah.
Whenever I
Well,
hear your story.
Well, thank you, Ricky, because, I'm a really emotional person and I'm really sensitive. And so that's what I want more than anything. I mean, I think there's a lot of value in learning about culture. It's imperative to set the context for learning about different people by learning more about their culture and the things that they value. But it's that heartfelt connection that really changes the world. And, just as a quick example, when I think about how the program has changed people, one thing I don't really talk about very often is my own son. When he was first starting so I started this in his elementary school. And the first time we got letters from Nicaragua, the kids had already written a letter against their will, like, okay, we're going to write a letter. They're like, oh. But then when we got the letters and we passed them out, so we had actually connected the students with, one other, a pen pal. So when we passed the letters out, Ricky, I mean, this is where it's really hard for me not to just start crying. I mean, this is 15 years ago, but the hush that fell over the room when these kids were looking at and holding these letters from someone across the world was just, I think maybe in that moment was when I knew I was going to dedicate my life to this. And then suddenly the kids were saying, well, because a lot of the letters were in Spanish, what's this word? Wait, where did you say Nicaragua is? Can we get the map out? And then we had told them before we handed out the letters that they would be writing a reply letter. And my son hates writing. He doesn't like, even to this day, he's 23 now. That's not his favorite activity. But while I was helping another student kind of translate some words from Spanish to English, my son went over to the place where the paper was, got a piece of paper, took it back to his desk, and started writing his reply letter before anyone had even asked him to. I mean, that's what we're talking about. I mean, that's the power of one-to-one. And I really do believe it creates unstoppable positive change in the world.
Absolutely. So do you hear stories from students who have maintained their contact beyond the school year?
Yeah. Well, I hear stories both about students who made contact with their Peace Pal after the school year. Of course, now it's almost always social media, so it's either Instagram or Snapchat. But yes, I hear some students, people that I run into later, will say, "Oh yeah, I've stayed in touch with that person for years, or I did at least for a while." And then I've also had students that I run into years later who tell me how it's changed some of the decisions that they've made for themselves in their lives. Several years ago, I was also teaching a course in peace studies at the University of New Mexico, and I ran into some students who had participated at that time, like 10 years prior, and they were very interested in international studies. Yeah, one of them said, I was going to go into engineering, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I really want to work with like the State Department in order to be an ambassador or just live and study abroad. And then actually a couple of the people I still are in contact with do work with the State Department. One is currently at the embassy in Algiers, and one is in DC. And they both will say that the participation in our program definitely was an influence in decisions that they made.
And I totally agree with you about that. The power of connecting and building relationships. That's the whole genesis of HoonArts. Looking back, I realized that one of the reasons I started HoonArts was because I wanted a relationship with people I met rather than just a visit. And that was the whole premise behind the exchange programs that I was involved with that led to the formation of HoonArts, and it certainly proved out the ability to open minds and open doorways that never would have been possible beforehand. You've talked a little bit about going digital as a result of the pandemic. Can you elaborate a little bit and talk about overall how the pandemic impacted Global One-to-One?
Yeah, sure. Well, boy, it impacted, like so many people, it impacted us tremendously. Well, number one of the things we haven't mentioned about Global One-to-One is that we also host international in-person visits to Albuquerque, New Mexico. Well, or at least we did before the pandemic. And so one of the big changes that we had was that obviously all of those trips were canceled. In fact, the week that things closed down in March of that year, we had a delegation from Tajikistan on their way to the airport to come to Albuquerque.
I remember
when
now.
They got word that their trip was being canceled. So that was a significant source of revenue for us. So a lot of the sources of revenue from schools for student participation, from these in-person exchanges, just evaporated overnight. So we were left high and dry with relatively no income. And then the other thing on a more kind of logistical level is this change, which I think everyone's talking about, how, we'll never completely go back to a non-digital version of anything, that Zoom or comparable video conferencing is going to remain a big part of our lives. Students are going to continue to learn at least part of the time virtually. So I think in one respect, this shift to a digital online platform has been really good for Global One-to-One. It's really forced us to kind of stretch and think about how we can keep people really connected when we're not physically connected. And I think, that's going to have a long-term impact on the way that we implement the program. And also, I would just say, one of the things that I was deeply impacted by this year was listening to the students who were participating in our program this year. And now this is where I'm probably going to tear up, because so many of these kids, when they would do their videos to introduce themselves, one of the prompts that we had was for them to describe how the pandemic was affecting their lives. And so many of them just talked about how depressed and alone they were. The kids in Boston, they were freshmen, but they'd never actually been inside their school. And so, ironically, we were connecting them with students in Morocco, but they were also getting to know their classmates in Boston through this program. And it just really, really affected me to see how hard at this stage in life, early in high school, these kids were just so depressed, really.
I've got a 7-year-old grandson who basically had the same experience. He's an only child. He's 7. In April of 2021, he started going back to school 2 days a week. He didn't have kids to play with for a year, which is hard to imagine. And he was desperate for social contact. And when my daughter was able to start taking him to the local park, younger kids that he earlier would have disdained playing with, any child was a potential target.
A potential friend.
A potential friend.
Yeah.
It was, and seeing that the impact on mental health of kids is just so dramatic. We see it as adults, but sometimes we forget that it has the same kind of impact on kids.
And potentially even more, because, with young kids and then adolescents, socialization is such a critical part of their being. It's definitely a major motivator for them, which is one of the reasons I started Peace Pal, was because I thought, okay, well, let's leverage that interest in peers to learn about culture. But to then suddenly be isolated, because it was just so abrupt. I mean, nobody really got a chance to prepare for it. So I think it's going to be interesting to see in the years to come what kind of long-term impact this experience has had on many of these young people who were isolated.
You talked a little bit about the funding impact of the pandemic. One of the reasons that I started the CCC program generally was I saw that the whole funding issue and revenue generation issue is so challenging for small businesses like HoonArts, as well as small nonprofits like Global One-to-One, and the income gap that continues to grow, and it also impacts the ability of small organizations to reach a larger audience. So has that been an ongoing challenge for Global One-to-One? And also, can you talk a little bit about some of the other challenges you may have faced over the years, now that you've got 15 plus years experience?
Well, I'll start with the challenges, because then we'll find ourselves back at the first question. Well, yeah, pretty much everything, because I started this organization by myself. I had no idea what I was doing. I started a nonprofit, an international nonprofit, with no prior experience. So
And
Everything
I
was
followed
hard.
in your footsteps.
You didn't learn from me. You didn't learn. Sorry, I tried to be a cautionary tale, but yeah, everything from the paperwork on how to become a 501c3 to, I think one of the really hard things for me along the way was developing partnerships. Because, I like you, I believe partnerships and collaborations are essential. To me, that's the paradigm of the world moving forward. If we don't know how to collaborate and share both the challenges and the struggles, as well as the joys and reap the benefits, we're a sunk ship, And so I'm really confident that people who, like us, are interested in changing this paradigm are going to prevail. But one of the things that's been really hard is for me to learn that actions speak louder than words. People who, that enthusiasm doesn't equate to follow through. I've had many partners over the years that really were very enthusiastic. And so I would do things like match teachers in one country with teachers in another country, or students in another country. And the thing there is these kids get to begin to develop these connections. And then sometimes teachers, kids would just say, it's too much work, and just kind of drop out. And that was really hard for me to understand, because I tried to say from the very beginning, this is a commitment. So anyway, I guess one of the answers to one of your questions is just, I tend to be a very trusting person. And if someone says they're going to do something, I believe them. And now I've gotten a little bit more cautious about that, and yet at the same time trying to keep an open mind and an open heart. But that's been an ongoing struggle over the years, is getting really solid collaborations, with partners that are going to be there tomorrow, like you.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and funding, for a small nonprofit. I mean, it's kind of it's very frustrating, because if you look at the impact, like Denise mentioned, we've had 18,000 young people in 29 countries participate in this little nonprofit program. So in other words, we have a huge impact. And that's not even measuring, like the emotional, psychological, social impact. I mean, just if, like, funders often will want to know, well, what is the quantitative data? How can you measure your impact? And yet, let's say, for example, when I have to submit our financial reports as part of an application for a grant, our budget's not huge by any means. And I've had funders say, well, if you're asking for X, kind of funding, but you've only got B or D funding currently, how are you going to know how to manage that? And it's like, well, look at what we've done. I mean, we can manage a lot. We just need the resources to get the staff that we need in order to do what we do more effectively in even a broader reach. So it's really frustrating. And I do think that collaboration in this regard is really important. I'd also really like to see more nonprofits or any kind of social enterprise collaborate. And, I've been trying for years to reach out to some of the nonprofits that do similar work and say, hey, let's collaborate. What we do is complementary. You do exchanges at this level, we do exchanges at this level, and imagine what we could do if we're doing it together. But it's part of this paradigm that's shifting, and it's hard to be patient when people like you and I and others can see what's possible, but then meet with resistance.
Mm-hmm. The old paradigm both on the nonprofit and the for-profit side, seems to be focused on building your own organization in a silo. Everything's about growing your organization, promoting your organization. If you collaborate, there needs to be a quid pro quo for the collaboration, and often there's a price tag, a dollar price tag attached to that. And that was one of the impetuses behind starting CCC, because I continue to be convinced that we need to think creatively about the way we collaborate, because the little guys, as I say frequently, they're often working more efficiently with smaller resources than the big guys. But the big guys get all the attention because they have the dollars to buy the audience. So this new paradigm of conscious collaboration that doesn't come equipped with a built-in cash price tag, I think is one way that we can start to shift. And I can personally foresee a dual track, if you will. The big guys continue to do their business and do it effectively, but if the little guys can band together in an effective way, they can build a larger audience and have a larger impact through working together, through conscious collaboration, rather than only focusing about building their own brand and marketing their own services and products.
Yeah, I think that just takes a fairly, it just takes a shift from thinking about such an entrenched view of, I want my slice of the pie. I'm not going to share it with anybody. If I try to share my piece, then if I share part of my piece with you, then that means what's left for me is smaller. And that's not true. That's just not true. And not only do we work more effectively, I think, a lot of us with fewer resources, smaller on the ground organizations, we also have, we've also learned a lot about dynamics in the way to run a business, the way to interact with people, that I think many larger businesses are either missing entirely, and some of them actually are conscious of the fact that they are missing something, that they want more interpersonal connection among their employees. That's good for business. If your employees are happy, then you're going to probably have more productive people. And what about, the metaphor or the paradigm could also be like, bigger businesses, there have been some businesses that have encouraged their employees to volunteer with an organization, to the point that they actually let their employees take paid time from work to go volunteer. And what they find is that really energizes those people when they come back to work. So I think that that's just one small example of ways that we can collaborate more, even at kind of somewhat superficial levels, so that it kind of trickles down at every level.
So as we start to wrap up our conversation today, what's one important tip or piece of advice that you would have for other people struggling to build a sustainable business, whether for profit or nonprofit, that has a social impact function or mission?
Perseverance. Just persevere. And in order to do that, we have to reach out to each other. It's so easy to just become isolated. Like, I've sometimes just persevered, but just by sheer grit, and perseverance when we can be inspired by and with each other is, I think, the ideal way, so that we can continue to be generating more, you know, how do you put that? You know, just so basically, again, it's like an exponential synergistic thing, you know, so that by being here with you today, I'm energized, and, you know, that helps me take that energy back to my work. But, you know, when I would make presentations to kids in school and I would say, look, I had no idea what I was doing when I started this organization. And now look what it's done. Anyone can do this. Anyone. And you got to be prepared to work really hard and stick with it.
It's certainly not an instant. The myth of the overnight success is truly a myth. So if members of our audience want to find out more about Global One-to-One, where should they go?
Our website is globalone2one.org. So GLOBAL, the number one, the letters TO, the number one.org. We also have a Facebook page and a LinkedIn page, an Instagram page, although I think that's been neglected. But the website is a good place to start. And if you use contact us, then that will go directly to me. And so if someone wants to ask me any particular questions or find out more about how to get involved, they can contact me that way.
Well, I certainly encourage any teachers or parents out there who are excited about the idea of having kids get involved in intercultural exchange in a really meaningful way. Just get in touch with Sarah. It'll be one of the best experiences of your life. So as we wrap up our conversation today, if I say the words conscious collaboration, what does that look like for you?
This. Yeah, it's like one of the best things. It's one of the best feelings, you know, conscious collaboration, when you get a group of people together who have similar visions, similar ideas, similar purpose, sense of purpose. And we start talking and we realize, oh, I can help with this and you could help with that. And, oh, you make a suggestion I never would have thought of. And, you know, so it's really, the whole is much greater than the sum of the parts. And everybody's a lot happier with conscious collaboration.
I couldn't say it better. So with that, I want to thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us today. It's been a delight to catch up with you personally and to be able to share your amazing work with our HoonArts audience. Thank you, as always, Denise. You're an integral part of our HoonArts team. So we'll say goodbye for today and look forward to seeing you the next time.
Thanks so much for having me here today. It's been great.
Thank you both. You've both been a tremendous inspiration to me over the years, and I know to so many other people too.
Thank you, Denise.
So
okay.
See you next time.
Yep. Thanks so much.